Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Raimundo Rios Mayo Library in Arcanasa. And welcome to Strange Things. I'm your host, Chris James. This is season number 1, episode 22, September 24th, 2016. Tonight, we're going to be talking about strange disappearances. Now, people have been going missing all the time. Some decide that they've just had enough of this life and they want to go somewhere else and start anew. Other times, people disappear because they're in trouble, say with the law, or they're having family issues. And then sometimes people just disappear and they don't know why. People with normal lives, nothing going wrong, nothing that anyone can point to and say this person ran away because of such and such. Now, each year, about 900,000 people vanish, and that's just in the United States. That doesn't include Canada, Mexico, South America, all the other countries on this planet. These are only the people tracked here in the United States. Not all these folks are running away from their former lives. Some are just missing, gone as if they had stepped into another dimension. Sometimes they're not alone when this mystery begins. Legends of mysterious mass disappearances have cropped up all across the globe. Without a doubt, the most famous incident in North American history is the unknown fate of the citizens of the Roanoke colony, who were last seen alive in 1587. There have been a few clues, carved on stones, found that were claimed to be clues. These were called the Dare Stones, named for the woman who is supposed to have carved them. Jim and Bill Vieira have been looking into this mysterious colony and have found one of the stones to be authentic. With a lot of work and some luck, they just might solve this one. We're not going to go into the Roanoke mystery too much tonight, simply because so many other people have done so much work on it. So if you'd be interested in finding out more about the Dare Stones and the Roanoke colony, check out Jim and Bill Vieira's TV show called The Lost Colony of Roanoke. December 4th, 1872, when the crew of the Dia Gratia spotted a ship moving in the haphazard way, they thought it looked peculiar. As they came alongside, they noticed the deck was unmanned. Now, at this time, you didn't go below decks and not leave at least one or two crew members up top, because there were things you could run into. There were things that could go wrong. The sails come untied, the ship get off course. So there's always a crewman or two stationed above deck. The captain of the Dia Gratia decided to send over a boarding party to try and find out what may be wrong. The ship had been abandoned, but why? The table was set as if it was time to eat. There are all the signs that the crew should be there, but they're all missing, along with the one and only lifeboat. The Dia Gratia placed a small crew on board the Mary Celeste and sailed it into port with hopes of claiming it as salvage. An inquiry found no clue as to what had become of the Benjamin Briggs and his family and the crew of this mystery ship. There are as many theories as to what became of the Mary Celeste, but none have laid the mystery to bed. To this date, the Mary Celeste has become synonymous with mysterious vanishings. A year later, September 3rd, 1873, a man named James Warson took on a challenge to run, in record time, from the town of Leamington to the town of Coventry. It's a 20-mile trek, 6 miles shy of a marathon. He'd been bragging about his abilities and was told to put up or shut up, so he set about to do just that. 2 friends, Hammerson Burns and Behrman Weiss, followed behind in a horse-drawn wagon. Burns brought along his camera. Worson was never out of their sight and would often turn around while running to exchange some friendly words with his 2 friends. Running in the middle of the road, Worson suddenly appeared to stumble and pitch forward, having time enough for only one short yell. Weiss later said it was the most ghastly sound either of us had ever heard. As Worson pitched forward with that terrible cry, instead of falling to the ground as he should have, he completely vanished in mid-fall, before ever striking the ground. The ground itself told the story of Weiss, and he took a picture to prove it. Footprints in the dirt, right down the middle of the road, and then nothing. They led down the middle of the road and vanished. A search party was called in from the local town. They brought bloodhounds to hopefully search and find where this man Worson had disappeared to. But the bloodhounds refused to go anywhere near the spot where the man had vanished from. He was never seen nor heard from again. Running along a dirt road only to vanish into thin air, it's not a good way to stay in shape. Louis Laprince is credited for having invented the first ever moving picture camera in 1886 while in New York City. He developed a 16-lens camera and filmed moving sequences. His work with cameras and film was before the work of the world-famous inventor Thomas Edison. 1890, while traveling in France to visit his brother, Laprince mysteriously vanished while on board a train bound for Paris. Despite investigations, no clues surrounding his disappearance were uncovered. He was never seen again. Some theories that explain his disappearance include suicide, assassination, and accidental death by drowning. He entered his train car only to disappear from this world, never to be seen again. Ambrose Bierce was a moderately successful journalist, editor, and writer who became known for his satirical books, something called The Devil's Dictionary, as well as several short stories that he'd written. Ambrose was a lieutenant during the Civil War. He is credited with risking his life to save a fallen comrade. He sustained a head wound at the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain. Bierce wrote many stories. One was called The Difficulty Crossing a Field. In this tale of a plantation owner who, as he walks through his field in full view of his family, the man vanishes. In the story, as the family gathers around trying to locate the missing man, they say they can hear his voice once in a while calling out to them, but they can't see him. And for ongoing years after this, they continue to hear the sound of this man's voice out there in the field, but he's never seen again. Bierce also wrote a book called The Incident at Owl Creek, a very disturbing story about a Confederate spy who's captured by the Union soldiers. They march him out into the middle of a bridge where they're going to hang him. As they drop the plank out from under his feet, the rope breaks, and this Confederate spy falls to the river. As his body hits the water, all the Union soldiers on the bridge begin shooting at him in an attempt to stop his escape, but he manages to hoof it down through the woods while being pursued by the soldiers. The entire story is him running through the woods, trying to make his way back home to his mansion. And finally, as he's breaking through the trees and he can see his wife stepping out onto the porch, and he's running towards her and she's looking towards him, and as he's almost to her arms, he wakes up standing on the bridge. The plank falls out from under him and he's hanged. And that was the end of the story. I remember seeing it when I was about 10 years old, and I still remember it to this day. It was a very disturbing story. And that was Ambrose Bierce. Anyway, we'll get back to him in just a few minutes. First, we're going to take a break for a few commercials, station identification, and all that good stuff. So don't go anywhere if you want to find out more about Ambrose Bierce. You're listening to Arcanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Looking for a great cup of coffee? Swing on by the Organic Man Coffee Truck, 1002 Eaterby Day, suite number 7. Not a coffee drinker? They have hot chocolate, hot tea, and sometimes muffins and cookies. It's a great place to meet your friends for a conversation or curl up in the corner with a good book. The Organic Man Coffee Truck. Life is too short to drink bad coffee.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arcanasa Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arcanasa Radio.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. And welcome back from those entertaining and enlightening commercials. A few more words from people we know. The Laredo Paranormal Research Society, the folks we interviewed last week, they would like to invite you to the second annual Mall del Norte Halloween Party. October 22nd, 2016, the LPRS will be hosting a Halloween-themed car show, a case review of some of their more spectacular investigations, and the movie Goosebumps. Festivities will begin at 3 p.m. and finish up around 11. Bring the whole family to Mall del Norte October 22nd, 2016 for the second annual LPRS Halloween theme show. Getting back to Ambrose Bierce, during the Mexican Revolution in 1913, Bierce traveled by horseback across the Rio Grande. It was there that he completely vanished, leaving the world mystified. Bierce was known for his brooding and depressing literature. Suicide can't necessarily be ruled out. In his last letter he wrote, "Goodbye. If you hear of my being stood up against a Mexican stone wall and shot to rags, please know that I think it is a pretty good way to depart this world." You can still find his books at Amazon.com. He has vanished from the planet, and no one knows for sure where he went. The Cyclops was launched in Philadelphia and placed into service on November 7th, 1910, with Lieutenant Commander George Worley in command. She voyaged in the Baltic from May till July of 1911 to supply the 2nd Division ships. Returning to Norfolk, Virginia, she operated on the East Coast from Newport, Rhode Island to the Caribbean, servicing the fleet. During the United States occupation of Veracruz in Mexico, 1914 to 1915, the Cyclops was used to supply coal to ships on patrol and help to evacuate refugees. When America entered the World War I, Cyclops was part of a convoy for Saint Nazaire, France, in June 1917, returning to the U.S. in July. Cyclops was later assigned to the coast of Brazil to fuel British ships in the South Atlantic. The Cyclops put to sea from Rio de Janeiro in February 1918, and sailed to Salvador, Brazil. 2 days later, she departed for Baltimore, Maryland, carrying manganese ore. There were no stops scheduled once they left Brazil. They were also carrying about 400 passengers, some of them military men, some of them just people who needed a passage back to the United States. Cyclops was due in Baltimore around March 13th, but she never showed up. No wreckage of her has ever been found. Many theories have been advanced, but none that satisfactorily account for her disappearance or the over 400 men on board. Some people up around the Virginia coast claim to have seen the Cyclops sailing by, but there's no record or report of it ever having gotten that far north. The Proteus was lost at sea to an unknown cause sometime around November 23rd, 1941. There are no German U-boat claims for this vessel. The ship and its 58-man crew have never been found. What makes this disappearance odd is the Proteus was the sister ship to the Cyclops. And then there's the Nereus, which was lost at sea sometime after December 10th, 1941, while steaming from St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands along the same route where the Cyclops had disappeared. The Nereus was presumed sunk after being torpedoed by a German U-boat, but once again, none of the U-boats ever claimed having seen the Nereus. Wreckage has never been located, nor the actual cause of her disappearance determined. Now, believe it or not, the Nereus, the Proteus, and the Cyclops were all sister ships. They're built from the same set of blueprints. They all vanished inside the Bermuda Triangle. Now, Lieutenant Percy Fawcett, world-famous explorer, he somehow managed to survive trench warfare and several other dangerous postings while serving in the British Army. His passion was exploring, and South America was paramore. Fawcett had an affinity for the native tribes he encountered on his many treks through the hostile, unmapped region. When most explorers would see the local natives running about with their spears and arrows, they would shoot first and ask questions later. But this was not Lieutenant Colonel Fawcett's way of dealing. Whenever Lieutenant Colonel Fawcett saw the natives, he would set down his rifle. He would take a white handkerchief from his pocket, wave it over his head, and begin singing while walking towards the natives. The natives were so pleased with his actions and not shooting at him that they would actually welcome him into their camp and share their food with him. He was allowed to spend many a night in what other explorers would have deemed hostile encampments. He is also reported to have encountered a anaconda, which was supposed to have been somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 feet long. He was constantly documenting all of his finds, but at the time he was not carrying a camera. In the middle of the South American jungle, there are some things you just can't carry around. But he did record the length of this huge snake as being somewhere in the vicinity of 40 feet. 1925, British archaeologist and explorer Percy Fawcett, together with his eldest son Jack, and a friend of theirs named Raleigh Rummel, set out for the jungles of Brazil in search of a hidden city of gold that Mr. Fawcett had declared the City of Z. Had to call it something, so he called it the City Z. When Lieutenant Colonel Fawcett failed to send out the promised telegrams, a search party was sent out to find him and his team. The searchers disappeared as well. So they sent more search parties, and then they sent a few more. Now today, if you go to the Royal Geographical Society and ask to see the Fawcett file, they won't let you see it. Not until you prove that you're not going to go running off looking for the missing explorer. To date, over 100 people have vanished while attempting to locate Fawcett and his two companions. If you want to look into Fawcett's amazing story, check out The Lost City Z by David Grain. It is, without a doubt, one of the best true-life adventure stories I have ever read, and it's available at Amazon.com as well. The trout and pike-filled estuary known as Anjikuni Lake, also spelled other ways, is located along the Kazan River in the remote Quebec region of Canada. The out-of-the-way area is rich with legends of malicious wood spirits and beasts like the Wendigo. But as fascinating as those off-tales are, there are none more intriguing than the terrifying and controversial mystery surrounding the collective vanishing of the villagers who once lived on the stony coast of Anjikuni. In November 1930, a Canadian fur trapper by the name of Joe LaBelle was working his area looking for fur to take back to town to sell. He was moving along the banks of the Anjikuni Lake and had been out for a long time. What with the winter being cold and his being tired from long months of travel, LaBelle headed for the nearby Inuit camp. Hot food and a place to sleep, always away from the cold, was always a good idea. And to get in where it'd be safe away from the wild animals, he knew he'd be welcomed once he got there. LaBelle had visited the area before and knew it was a bustling fishing town full of friendly locals. But when he arrived, the town looked vacant. He tried shouting a greeting, only to hear nothing but his own echo. LaBelle moved slowly through the town, unsure of what was unfolding before his eyes. Each hut he looked into was empty, no sign of inhabitants for quite some time. He did spot a smoldering fire ahead and hastened to contact whoever was still there. The fire was near its final stages, and the food left to cook was beyond charred. LaBelle had spent most of his life working and living out in the wilds of Canada. He knew how to survive on his own. But this deserted village was way beyond anything he'd ever encountered. Not just deserted, but left as if a sudden disaster had befallen the inhabitants and flight was their only means of survival. Food on the tables, clothes that would have been needed if they were going to be away for any time in the cold, weapons that were worth more than anything else. The food stored away for winter was still there, waiting for the villagers to return. The boats and kayaks were lined up on shore, so LaBelle looked for signs of the villagers passing. He wanted to see which direction the people had gone. Look as hard as he could, and remember, LaBelle was a tracker as well as a trapper. He found no footprints whatsoever. The situation must have been too much for LaBelle to handle, so he left with all the speed he could muster. He managed to hike out to the next village, where he was able to find a telegraph office, and he sent out a call for help. Message was sent to the closest Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, barracks. By the time the Mounties arrived, several hours later, LaBelle had calmed himself, probably with a few shots of whiskey, enough to relate his disturbing tale. The RCMP headed out towards the village, and on their way, they stopped at a camp run by a Laurent and his sons, and asked if they had seen or heard anything out of the ordinary. The trapper, Laurent, responded with some weird sightings they had had. There had been a bizarre gleaming object soaring across the sky just a few days before. Laurent claimed that the enormous illuminated flying thing seems to change shape before his very eyes, transforming from a cylinder into a bullet-shaped object. He further divulged that this unusual object was flying in the direction of the village at Anjukuni. The subsequent investigation found the Inuit, or someone, or something, had dug up the graves and removed all of the bodies as well. All the sled dogs were found wandering about on the tundra. They all looked well fed and taken care of. None of the dogs had suffered from the apparent disappearance of the villagers. Why would the villagers leave without taking their weapons, their food, or their dogs? They also had left behind lots of cold winter gear, coats, boots, things like that, and simply had set off out into the cold with no apparent plans of returning. This is not a good survival plan. To this date, they haven't found any of the villagers. They still remain nothing but a mystery. We're going to take a brief pause right now, play a few commercials. We'll be back in just a minute, so don't go anywhere if you want to hear more about bizarre disappearances. You're listening to Arcanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Looking for a great cup of coffee? Swing on by the Organic Man Coffee Truck, 1002 Iturbide, suite number 7. Not a coffee drinker? They have hot chocolate, hot tea, and sometimes muffins and cookies. It's a great place to meet your friends for a conversation or curl up in the corner with a good book. The Organic Man Coffee Truck. Life is too short to drink bad coffee.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arcanasa Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arcanasa Radio.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. Welcome back to Strange Things. Just a reminder, the 15th anniversary Texas Bigfoot Conference kicks off in just a little while. Meet all the people you've seen on TV. Craig Woolheater, Ken Gerhart, Nick Redfern, Lyle Blackburn, Dr. Jeff Meldrum, just to mention a few. October 15th in historical Jefferson, Texas. Make plans to attend and don't miss out. The Texas Bigfoot Conference. Just look for Texas Bigfoot Research Center on your computer for more details. Now we're talking about strange disappearances, and no show about disappearances would be complete without talking about Amelia Earhart. She was a female aviation celebrity of the 30s. She was the first woman pilot to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. She received the U.S. Distinguished Flying Cross for her accomplishments. She set many other records, wrote best-selling books about her flying experiences, and was instrumental in the formation of an organization for female pilots. Earhart joined the faculty of an aviation department in 1935 as a visiting faculty member to consult women on careers and help inspires others with her love of aviation. 1937, accompanied by flight navigator Fred Noonan, she was attempting an around-the-world flight. Had she succeeded, she would have become the first woman to circumnavigate the world by airplane. At 10:22 in the morning, on the 1st of July, Earhart and Noonan departed from Lae, New Guinea, en route to Howland Island, which was about 4,000 kilometers away. It was the last time they were to be seen alive. Most folks don't know that before Earhart was to use Howland Island as a landing strip, there was nothing there. The U.S. went in and built a landing strip on the island just so Earhart could land, fuel up, and then leave. The rumors began to circulate that Earhart was working for the War Department, and her flight around the world was to spy on the Japanese military. She would fly right past some of their clandestine locations and then report back once she was in the United States again. There are those who say Earhart crash-landed on some as of yet unknown island, or perhaps she perished in the sea. Reports began to come in from people who claimed to have seen Earhart back in the States. Then there are the stories coming from some of the locals living in and around the last known location of Earhart and Noonan. They say they saw Earhart and Noonan being transported by the Japanese as prisoners. Now, these islanders had never seen a white man and a white woman before. So to them, something as peculiar as this couple anywhere on the island would be a memorable moment. The plane, Lockheed Electra 10E, was also seen, not by farmers, but by sailors and Marines. It was sitting on a runway on one of the Solomon Islands. Amelia Earhart, The Truth at Last, by Mike Campbell, presents some very interesting new findings as well as going over historic accounts of what may have actually happened to Earhart and Noonan. Eyewitness accounts and analysis and never before published revelations from many unimpeachable sources, including a famed U.S. general and an iconic newsman. The Truth at Last explodes the government's created myth that Amelia Earhart's Electra NR 16020 crashed and sank in the Central Pacific off Howland Island. If you'd be interested in finding out a little more about Amelia Earhart and what may or may not have happened to her, check out the book, Truth at Last, available at Amazon.com. Well worth reading. It will definitely open your eyes about one of the great mysteries of the planet. In 1944, when a popular American jazz musician and band leader, Glenn Miller, vanished en route from England to France, where he was set to play for the troops in Paris. where the United States military had recently chased the Nazis out of town. Few people heard anything about it. It happened the same day that the Germans had launched what was later to become known as the Battle of the Bulge. So the disappearance of Glenn Miller really went unannounced. Everyone was talking about the brand new Panzer tank that the Germans had just sent out into the field. It was considered indestructible. Everyone was talking about the fact that the war was almost over and now it looks like it's not going to be over for a long time. No one noticed the fact that this man and his airplane had vanished. What happened to the single-engine Norseman he was riding in over the English Channel some 10 days before Christmas has never been explained, and no trace of Miller or the plane has ever been found. Now, there is speculation that perhaps a German fighter got it and that the plane was hit by ordnance being dropped by British bombers on their way back from a canceled bomb mission. See, back then, if you were flying in an old bomber and you had a bomb on board your plane, you couldn't land. You weren't allowed to land because of fear that the bomb would explode when you hit the runway. Not only would it damage the runway, it would destroy your airplane, and it would kill you as well. So the idea was that perhaps the bombers were way up in the sky and Glenn Miller was flying along low on the channel, and that one of these planes accidentally dropped a bomb on him. That is one of many theories. Yes, there are a lot of rumors. Another one being that Glenn Miller was working as a spy and that he parachuted behind enemy lines only to wind up being killed. Others say he was the victim of a Nazi plot to take him out as a sign of their strength. After all, Glenn Miller was the Elvis Presley of his time. If you were hip, if you listened to music, you listened to Glenn Miller, the big band sound. No one can say for sure what became of the big band leader, but it is one of our lasting mysteries. Somewhere out there, perhaps, is the wreckage of his plane, perhaps with him still sitting behind the controls. Then again, perhaps we'll never know. December 1945. Flight 19 took off for a routine navigation and combat training exercise in TBM-type aircraft. The assignment was called Navigation Problem Number 1. What a not very exciting name. A combination of bombing and navigation, which other flights had completed or were scheduled to undertake that same day. The flight leader was United States Navy Lieutenant Charles Taylor, who had about 2,500 hours of flying, mostly in aircraft similar to the one he's flying in now, while his trainee pilots each had about 300 hours total. None of them were that new to flying, and Taylor had flown in combat. Taylor had completed a combat tour in the Pacific Theater as a torpedo bomber, aircraft carrier USS Hancock, and had recently arrived from NAS Miami, where he had been a VTB instructor. The student pilots had recently completed other training missions in the area where the flight was to take place. They were all familiar with this area. It's not as if they were brand new pilots. They had all been on training flights in and around the area. The aircraft were 5 TBM-1Cs. Each one was fully fueled, and during the pre-flight check, it was discovered they were all missing their clocks. Now, who took the clocks out of the cockpit, and why? I guess it was hoped that all the pilots would be wearing a wristwatch because this was an important part of navigation. You didn't just jump in your plane and call up your GPS to find out where you're going. There was no such thing. You used your compass, you used your clock to figure out where you're at. Perhaps the clocks had been removed as part of the training mission, forcing the pilots to rely on their wristwatch, we don't know for sure. Called Naval Air Station, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Navigation problem number 1. The exercise involved 3 different legs, but the actual flight should have flown 4. The flight was to head out to the Hen and Chicken Shoal, where low-level bombing practice was carried out. The shoal had a ship that had crashed in the area, had sunk, but it was visible from above, and that's what they were going to be bombing. They were going to be bombing an already sunk ship. The flight was to continue, heading until it was time to turn into a new course and would take them over Grand Bahama Island. Radio conversations between the pilots were overheard by base and other aircraft in the area. The practice bombing operation is known to have been carried out because at about 1500 a pilot requested and was given permission to drop his last bomb. 40 minutes later, another flight instructor, Lieutenant Robert F. Cox, an FT-74 formation, forming up with his group of students for the same mission, received an unidentified transmission. An unidentified crew member asked Powers, one of the students, for his compass reading, to which Powers replied, "I don't know where we are. We must have gotten lost after that last turn." Now this gets weird. The TBM airplane was equipped with not 1, but 2 compasses. That would mean that 10 compasses all went crazy at the same time. Radio transmissions began to break up, but some were still getting through to the tower. Someone in Flight 19 said, "The ocean doesn't look right. It looks weird." The sun not only was obscured by clouds, but to an extent that even the glow was not perceivable. Now this late in the afternoon, all they would have had to do is point their planes in the direction of the sun, and it would have taken them back over land. But due to the overcast conditions, they weren't even able to pick up the glow of the sun. The tower asked Flight 19 to turn on their IFF. IFF stands for Identify Friend or Foe. This was an electronic transmitter that gave off a distinct signal that only our planes would have. If you see a plane flying along and it does not have an IFF, you shot at it. One of the student pilots suggested just flying west. None of the planes broke formation because you just didn't do that in the military. Taylor told his flight that they'd stick together until one of them was down to fumes, and then they would all ditch together. This would reduce the chance of any of them becoming lost at sea during the search that was bound to come after them soon. Now Taylor is supposed to have said, and this was recorded, "Don't come after me. They look like they're from outer space. Don't come after me." The text of this radio transmission from Flight 19 are on public record in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. The Navy sent out search and rescue planes as soon as they were suspected of being lost. They also directed any ships in the vicinity to make haste in that direction to look for survivors. The search lasted as long as was possible. No wreckage was ever found. No life rafts or flotation devices ever showed up. As the search was winding down, it suddenly became apparent that one of the seaplanes was now missing as well. A Mariner seaplane with 13-man crew was nowhere to be found. The disappearance of the 14 men of Flight 19 and the 13 men of the Mariner became a chapter in the story of the Bermuda Triangle. Now, in 1991, a salvage ship found 5 Avenger planes at 600 feet on the ocean floor, just off the coast of Florida. The newspapers immediately all said, "Aha, we have found Flight 19, the mystery's been solved." Then they sent down a subcrew to identify the 5 airplanes. They checked the planes for identification numbers on the wings and on the horizontal stabilizer. And what they came up with just made the mystery that much weirder. The 5 planes that they found were identical Avenger bomber planes, but there are 5 different planes. How weird is it that 5 Avenger bombers would crash in the same area where Flight 19's 5 Avenger bombers went missing? So now we've got 5 planes sitting on the bottom of the ocean that they're not too sure why they crashed, and we still have the 5 missing planes of Flight 19. Some mysteries just never go away. December 1st, 1949, a Mr. Tetford vanished from a crowded bus. Tetford was on his way home to Bennington from a trip to St. Albans, Vermont. Tetford was a soldier who was living in a soldier's home in Bennington. He was sitting on a bus with 14 other passengers. All the other passengers testified to seeing him there, sleeping in his seat. But when the bus reached the destination, Mr. Tetford was gone, although his belongings were still on the baggage rack, and the bus timetable was laying open in his empty seat. Mr. Tetford was never seen or heard from again. 1953, Lieutenant Felix Moncla was stationed in Kinrose Air Force Base in Michigan. An unidentified flying object appeared on radar, and Moncla took an F-89 Scorpion interceptor to investigate. Ground radar operators reported that Moncla's aircraft flew at about 500 miles an hour, and it was closing with the object that they had on radar. They watched as his radar blip closed with this unknown flying object somewhere over northern Lake Superior at about 7,000 feet. At that time, operators claimed that on radar, Moncla's aircraft merged with the UFO, at which point they both disappeared. A search and rescue turned up nothing. No debris or wreckage was ever found from either aircraft. Canadian aviation authorities have since maintained that there were no planes in the sky at the time of the mysterious merger. Moncla and his plane were never seen again. No wreckage, no reports of a crashed plane, no lieutenant. For those of you that don't know, the area around Lake Superior has been the site of several unexplained disappearances. It's got a reputation similar to that of the Bermuda Triangle. We're going to take a brief pause here, play some commercials, and drink some coffee. We'll be right back after these worthy messages. You're listening to Arcanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Looking for a great cup of coffee? Swing on by the Organic Man Coffee Truck, 1002 Eaterby Day, suite number 7. Not a coffee drinker? They have hot chocolate, hot tea, and sometimes muffins and cookies. It's a great place to meet your friends for a conversation or curl up in the corner with a good book. The Organic Man Coffee Truck. Life is too short to drink bad coffee. You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. And welcome back. Hope you enjoyed those commercials. Gives my voice a break from talking so much. Don't forget to make plans for October 22nd, 2016 for the second annual Laredo Paranormal Research Society's Halloween event. They'll be showing the movie Goosebumps at Mall del Norte. Festivities will begin about 3 p.m. and finish up about 11. Bring your whole family to enjoy the evening together. And, of course, it's free of charge. November 24th, 1971. A man purchased a coach ticket on Northwest Airlines Boeing 727 from Portland, Oregon. He paid cash, and he claimed his name was Dan Cooper. Once the plane was in flight, he handed a note to Florence Schaffner, a stewardess, who thought little of it at first because at that time stewardesses were always getting notes, phone numbers, requests for liaisons when they got on the ground from male passengers. Well, at one point, Cooper quietly told Schaffner, "Miss, you better take a look at that note." The note said he had a bomb. And Cooper opened his carry-on briefcase to reveal what looked like sticks of dynamite and ordered Schaffner to pass the note to the captain, but for her and the other crew members not to spread the alarm, acting casual and behave as if nothing was out of the ordinary. The note also ordered the captain to divert the plane to Seattle, which the pilot did, claiming mechanical failure. While the passengers grumbled, they never suspected they were being hijacked until landing on the terra firma, when they were interrogated by the FBI, who wanted to know who this Cooper man was. Once on the ground, Cooper ordered the flight crew to release the passengers, but continue to keep the captain and the crew captive, as he made a request for 4 parachutes and $200,000 in cash, which would have weighed about 20 pounds. He then had the plane take off again, having it stay at a speed of 200 miles per hour. Why 4 parachutes, you may ask? The thought was that Cooper would have forced one of the crew members to put on a parachute and jump with him. This would keep the FBI and the police from rigging the parachute so that when Cooper jumped out of the plane, he would crash to his death. Not knowing for sure that one of the flight crew wasn't going out the door with him, the FBI was forced not to make any changes to any of the parachutes. Somewhere over Lewis River in southern Washington, Cooper opened the rear exit door of the plane while it was still in flight, and he jumped with the cash. No visible protective gear and only a parachute. Cooper, most of the money, and his parachute were never seen again. To date, this is the only unsolved skyjacking in the history of aviation. The FBI thoroughly investigated the case, chasing several leads and suspects. The press accidentally dubbed the character D.B. Cooper, who was only known on the flight manifest as Dan. No one could find a trace of him nor locate any of the stolen traceable cash. The FBI had taken down all the serial numbers of all the bills before handing the money over to Cooper. A plastic sign from a Boeing 727 and a parachute were discovered in the woods near the bailout area in 1980, and some of the marked bills did show up, washed up in the mud near the Columbia River. These clues suggested to some that Cooper either perished in the woods or landed in the Columbia and drowned. However, others believe, from his coolness and planning, that he actually survived and got away with one of the most daring crimes of the 20th century. The so-called experts all lauded the inadvisability of Cooper taking the military parachute instead of using one of the sportsman-style chutes. However, during an interview with a retired soldier, airborne soldier, who had made hundreds of jumps, said that not only did Cooper choose the right chute, but the jump really wasn't all that hard. If instead of dynamite, what if Cooper had had flares in the briefcase? Then, standing on the rear step of the plane, he could throw the flares out to judge the wind and let him gauge the ground below. One of the sportsman chutes had been cut up and parts were missing. Maybe Cooper had fashioned little chutes for the flares. He may have fashioned a harness to help him hold on to the cache as well. A woman named Marla Cooper came forward recently claiming she had a 40-year-old family secret protecting her uncle, a man named Lynn Doyle Cooper. Marla Cooper said she was 8 years old when her uncle, whom she called L.D. Cooper, came to her home badly injured for Thanksgiving in 1971, the day after the hijacking. He claimed his injuries were the result of a car crash. Later, she recalled that her parents came to believe that L.D. Cooper actually was the hijacker. Miss Cooper never saw her uncle again after that day and was told that he had died in 1999. Marla also recalled how two of her uncles had been practicing using handheld radios to communicate back and forth in the woods to see how far apart they could get and still talk. Perhaps both uncles were involved in the hijacking. One jumped out of the plane and the other one was on the ground to come to his aid as soon as he touched down. In addition, Marla Cooper said that her uncle was fixated on a comic book character named Dan Cooper, the name of the skyjacker that had been given to the airliner before boarding. Then in 1980, while camping on Tina Bar on the Columbia River, a family unearthed $5,800 of the skyjacker's ransom money. The FBI checked the serial numbers of the bills, and they matched. The odd thing about this was the cash was all held together with rubber bands. After 9 years buried in wet sand, how would the rubber bands retain their elasticity? Rubber bands deteriorate quickly when left in a drawer, let alone out in the elements. The found cache led searchers away from where Cooper might have landed, and it only muddied the water when it comes to finding out what really became of D.B. Cooper. Ground Zero Media has a very interesting show about D.B. Cooper. Clyde Lewis interviewed a man named Galen Cook, and together they discussed another man that they both had known, named William Wolfgang Gossett. Now, Clyde Lewis is absolutely convinced that D.B. Cooper and Wolfgang Gossett were one of the same. If you'd like to listen to the show, simply go to Ground Zero Media and search for 81011 and give it a listen. It is well worth your time. July 30th, 1973, Jimmy Hoffa vanished without a trace. But seeing as he was involved with the mafia, the labor unions, and Richard Nixon, he was probably disappeared by one of the before-mentioned group. He has been discussed so much, we're not going to go into much detail about him, only to say that George Norrie from Coast to Coast AM was the last person to ever interview Jimmy Hoffa alive. October 1978, Frederick Valentich was flying over Bass Straits, Australia, when he was attacked by an unknown flying craft. He contacted Air Traffic Control in Melbourne and described the craft, saying it was hovering and it's not an aircraft. He requested help of whatever kind could be afforded him and then vanished. Air Search and Rescue was sent to look for the man and his airplane, but could find no trace of him. There was no wreckage, and his plane never showed up at any runway to this day. He is still missing. Sometime around 1980, Now, this is a personal story, so I know it's true. It's for you to decide whether you want to believe me or not. It still confuses me to this day. Before coming to Laredo, I was in the fire department. There was a guy who was a raging alcoholic, and he had decided that he was sick and tired of being sick and tired, so he called us for help. We arranged to transport him to a VA establishment in Houston. It was specially designed for folks like him. All the arrangements were set, so all we need do was deliver the body to the building. The guy was in bad shape when we picked him up. He was sitting on the ground under a public phone, the handset still held to his ear. He was in need of a good scrubbing and some clothes with far less personality. We loaded him up, drove him the 30 miles into town, listening to him tell how much he appreciated our help and how he was never going to drink again. The facility was something from a bad movie. It was an old building that might have been abandoned at least once. The streets were occupied by people who should have been on the inside, and there was trash piled up everywhere. The only entrance for us was set back from the street a few feet, and we unloaded our charge and hustled him to the front door, which was locked. We had to ring a bell and then wait. An orderly checked us out through a very thick window. Then he buzzed us into the vestibule. Now we're locked in a tiny little room with our odorific patient. The orderly checked us out some more, wanted to see our IDs, wanted to make sure who we were and that we were the same people who had talked to him on the phone. Then they buzzed us through the second door. The inside was nothing like I'd ever seen before. Typical government facility, puke green walls, half the lights were out. It looked like it could have been the set for a bad movie. The windows were all locked and covered with mesh screens. All the doors were locked and had to be opened by one of the chosen few with a key. These weren't the card keys that you slid through a lock. These were an actual key on a chain that you had to stick in the doorknob and turn. All the doors were locked. Our guy was given a nice quiet room with 3 other patients who were all trying to purge their inner demons. The room was utilitarian. Beds, a few chairs, some wall lockers for clothing. His soon-to-be roommates were all asleep at the time. We left him to relax and went to fill out the paperwork. The desk chair only had 3 wheels. The desk was rusted metal. We got busy with the paperwork. Once he was officially theirs, we were ready to get out of there. But first, I just wanted to wish the patient success in his new life. I stuck my head in his room, and he was not there. I looked under his bed. I looked in the wall locker assigned to him. My partner began looking in places that I had already checked. The orderly, who was beginning to freak out a little, also looked everywhere as well. The man was gone. There were no cameras, nothing like that in the building at the time. We're talking the 80s. But there was no way out either. We woke up all of the roommates, and they didn't know what the heck was going on. They'd all been asleep at the time. He couldn't have opened a window. He couldn't have opened a door. He had simply vanished from the earth. We checked rooms that there was no way the guy could have gotten into. We checked places. We even looked up in the ceiling tiles. He wasn't there. There was no sign of him having passed. As grubby as he was, he would have left black fingerprints on the white tiles. Once we had exhausted every possible idea we had to get going. It was late. We were supposed to be home already. We left with feelings of having failed in our mission to get this poor rummy some much-needed help. We got him to the building, only to lose him. He never came out of his hiding place. He was listed as having run away, but that was impossible. How could he have gotten out of a building that was so securely locked? I still think about that guy on occasion, and I wonder Whatever happened to him? Did he simply vanish from the building, or did somebody come and get him? Well, I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. It's been a bit disturbing researching all these missing folks. Next week, we're going to be talking about sea monsters. So tune in and find out why you don't want to venture out too far from the shore. Until then, this is Chris James with Strange Things. Thank you for listening.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, they say murder three? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?